Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Robert Gelb, a very sleazy Robert Gelb, and this is my esteemed colleague Gordon on the other side of the Atlantic, Gordon Blackadder. We are Leaf and Bean. I am coming to you from deep in the wilds of Scotland, and Gordon is a Scot coming to you from deep in the wilds of just outside Providence, Rhode Island. And we are going to be chatting about the Scottish Referendum, which is happening in less than a week, this coming Thursday. This is, as longtime viewers will know, a conversation that we decided to record and make public somewhat stupidly that we just haven't stopped doing. So, picking up from last week.
So at the end of last week, you asked me if there was any kind of groundbreaking or game-changing event that could happen during the week.
Like an October surprise.
Yes, like the equivalent of an October surprise. And I couldn't think of any, but yesterday we found out that the world's most famous Scottish person, The Simpsons' very own groundskeeper Willie, is in favor of Scottish independence in what will no doubt be the game-changing event of the election.
You heard it here first.
You did hear it. Well, there was some debate. Probably the only thing that could really, beyond some kind of cataclysmic, natural disaster or something, the only person who has an influence in a situation and who hasn't said anything that I can think of is the Queen. And the Queen is constitutionally not really supposed to have an opinion on any political subject one way or the other. You've seen a lot of debate this week. There was a suggestion in the papers about a week ago that she'd come out against independence, and then her aides all gathered around saying that wasn't true, and then Alex Salmond said, actually, I think she would be proud to be Queen of Scots, and the palace again said, hey, well, we're not taking sides in this. Today it turns out she's telling Scots to think very carefully, and you can't really argue with that, so there you go.
Yeah. And this time last week, a poll had come out that morning showing the Yes campaign in the front, a YouGov poll, the first real poll to show a positive showing for the Yes campaign, and you saw a lot of Westminster politicians stop what they were doing and rush up to Scotland, so that in a seeming panic to try and prevent this. Throughout the week, you saw lots of large businesses make somewhat quite coded messages about the referendum and what they think it would do for business. Certain ones were more overt, like BP, for example. Others, like banks, had mixed messages that both sides took to their own or tried to profit from it in their own way. And most recently, I think today and yesterday, Rupert Murdoch has arrived in Scotland ahead of the referendum debate. Referendum. A lot of people are apparently saying that the Scottish Sun could come out for independence. So apparently there's a bit of toying there back and forth. Some of the other big newspapers, the Scotsman, has come out against independence for a no vote. The Sunday Herald had come out, I think, for independence a little bit ago.
Yes, the Herald is the only paper that's come out in favor of independence.
Yeah, and then there was another one that came out the other day against independence as well. But the Scotsman was the only one that I was really paying attention to, I'm afraid. So you have things like that. I mean, you're starting to hear like regurgitations of the currency issue more loudly. You're also seeing Gordon. You saw Gordon Brown. We saw Gordon Brown actually, show his face and start talking. A very emotional Gordon Brown about why he doesn't want to leave. And so it was quite an exciting, a lot of stuff happened, and of course, perhaps the savior for the No campaign, Nigel Farage, was in Glasgow campaigning. So there's been a lot of activity. It seems like the polls haven't, like, the most of the polls, the no's are still slightly ahead, but it's certainly a statistical tie at the moment.
Yes, there were 4 polls released today, three of which showed the no's ahead by a greater or lesser degree. There was one poll that showed the yeses ahead, but it was an internet-conducted poll, so it certainly suffers from the bias of self-selection. So if you don't include that poll, actually, so far there's only been one poll that has shown the yeses to be ahead, and you're certainly getting, because of the plus minus, that yes was basically a statistical tie, but overall you're certainly seeing a trend that is the no's very marginally ahead, which is in contrast to the independence referendum in Quebec, where about a half dozen polls over the course of a month before the referendum had the yeses ahead. So the parallels aren't that great for the yes campaign, but the fact that it's a statistical tie is much closer than anybody, I think, thought it would be.
You also had Mark Carney come out this week and kind of say something that was quite matter of fact, but of course the no campaign took that in one direction. He was talking about the fact that because the Westminster parties have said that a currency union isn't happening, that would be devastating because of X, Y, and Z. So some people were saying that Mark Carney, that this is embarrassing for the Yes campaign because he said, the head of the Bank of England determines, fiscal the fiscal directions and everything. So why are we worrying about what Westminster says? So this seemed like it could have been a bit of a turn and a bit of an embarrassment, but at the same time, if you listen to what he was saying, he was just reiterating the fact that if Westminster parties wouldn't permit a currency union, then there wouldn't be able to be one. So it wasn't really anything new. So you had a lot of these, I felt like, throughout the week. But the closer you move to it, the sillier everything becomes.
Yes. I mean, you kind of have seen everybody starting to pile in. You had Paul Krugman, I think on Tuesday or so, coming out and saying that an independent Scotland could have a potentially good economy, but probably would end up just being like Spain without the sunshine, was his rather nifty little phrase.
I have questions about that for you. So Paul Krugman's article basically took a tack of saying he was comparing Spain and Spain's effect with the financial crisis and that of like Florida. And he was saying that a lot of the Florida banks went bust during the financial collapse, but because they were all federally insured, the federal government came in, they bailed them out. The support was there because it was both a single market and a single system. Whereas in Europe, a lot of the Spanish banks faltered, and they were forced to put in a lot of austerity measures because they were beholden to a central bank that was outside of their own remit, and they had given up a lot of this power. So if that is such a, and on the surface that sounds like a very convincing argument. Okay, yeah. So Spain is pretty big, certainly much bigger than Scotland. And if the Spanish banks and if Spain has been forced into this austerity, what happens if Scotland then joins the EU, still has its big banking sector, but something were to happen? My question is, why hasn't that argument, if it's such a great argument, why hasn't it really been discussed before? Because I know it's been mentioned before, but it's usually, maybe it's just because of the lack of the euro really taking center stage as a viable possibility. But you're hearing really the big concern about a lack of a currency union within the UK. I just wonder why a wider discussion hasn't been made or hasn't been had.
Well, you've seen. I think you have seen a lot of debate about this. Most prominently today, Joseph Stiglitz, who's another Nobel Prize-winning economist, came out and basically wrote an article rebutting a lot of what Krugman had said. But I think that you have actually seen a lot of discussion about the pros and cons of currency union and about aligning Scotland with England in a currency union versus being outside of it. The fact that the banks wouldn't be able to be bailed out was in fact is the central issue in terms of the banks announcing this week, Royal Bank of Scotland most prominently announcing that it would be moving its headquarters south of the border to London because of that very issue, because of the financial stability issue, the idea that an independent Scotland couldn't bail them out. So I think while Krugman maybe took a slightly different take on it, I think the particular issue on how could Scotland afford to have a banking sector, especially when it doesn't have control over its own currency, has been aired in some form or another fairly consistently over the last few months, and indeed the last year.
So what do you? Looking back at this week, there's been just a lot of a lot of passions have been brought up. What do you think were the missteps, and what do you think were the positives on each side this week?
Oh boy, that's a great question. You know, the polls are still being narrowing. I think Salmond this morning was at risk of looking a bit arrogant when he started talking about, hey, after we vote for independence, this is what I'm going to be doing and stuff, when the polls haven't actually shown him consistently ahead by any stretch of the imagination. On the other hand, the No campaign really did smack of panic. You saw all these leaders cancelling Prime Minister's question time, going north.
Suddenly.
You know, a lot of Scots thinking, well, hang a minute. I mean, maybe if we'd had this much attention for the last 2 years, we wouldn't be having this debate. And in fact, if we'd had this much attention for the last 30 years, a lot of the problems that have in Scotland that have spurned talk of independence maybe wouldn't have existed in the first place. So, you know, I think that was a misstep. In terms of pros, the Yes campaign has certainly solidified their vote. They seem to have tremendous momentum, and although they haven't been able to maintain that momentum, they've certainly been able to maintain their vote at around the 48-49% mark consistently for about a week and a half now across half a dozen polls or so. So that's been very impressive. The Noes, though, were able to blunt the momentum. Perhaps that was less to do with the Noes so much as just a general kind of shock that maybe caused people to reevaluate what their opinion was. But certainly, you're right. There's been, although the polls haven't moved that much, I actually get the sense that there's been quite a lot of movement under the water over the last week or so.
Sorry?
I was going to ask, so how's that been for you when you're actually, you know, I'm certainly getting the impression that this is not just another election where basically the politicians are so pontificate and so forth, and then people side one way or the other. It seems that this debate, because it's so cataclysmic, one way or the other, you know, really setting in stone a decision for a decade or a generation, there seems to be a lot more personal involvement. There seems to be, you know, everybody seems to be taking a side. The number of undecided is pretty small, but once they've taken a side, they're going on the street, they're protesting one way or the other, they're doing the marches, they're wearing the badges, they're putting up the posters. I wonder if that's the sense you're getting.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like, for example, hearing the news out of Glasgow seems to be a very, certainly a hotbed of activity on both sides, a lot of passion, a lot of people are on the streets for both sides. You know, the Yes campaign rolled into town and turned into St. Andrews, and they had this old fire truck that was painted blue, and people were out chatting to people. And the other day, you know, heard about the No campaign. A lot of people were out there stopping people in the streets and talking to them. So it's certainly a very personal campaign, and a lot of people are you know, posting about it, about their you know, their views on Facebook. Certainly very passionate both ways, and I do, you know, a lot of times, I think on Radio 4 there were two interviews, one with Alistair Darling, and then right afterwards with Alex Salmond. It took a bit more of a personal tone, a personal nature. Obviously, tensions seem to be quite high. You do have some people getting a little bit worried about, regardless of the outcome, especially the fact that it's so close. What is the mood going to be like afterwards? Either way, if in the case of a no vote, you might see a lot of anger, a lot of feeling of disenfranchisement, and potentially some real hardcore anger bubbling over. Some say in the event of a yes, people just don't know what's going to happen, and so there is a sense of unknowingness. Some people are quite worried about this. It seems as though more and more people, you're noticing, or at least I'm noticing, are quite worried about this. Mostly, I think, just because it's never happened before, and so no one knows. Particularly, I've read some reports that they are a little concerned about Glasgow and certain parts of Glasgow, just about what might happen. But I think that's regardless of how the vote goes. I don't think it's one side or another side necessarily. But it's certainly becoming quite. I mean, hey, I was called by a pollster. I've never been called by a pollster before, so so it's quite cool. So it's obviously.
Can we just segue after that? I'm not going to ask you what your answers were, but what kind of questions were they asking?
Sure, I'll go through the questions. I think I remember them. So first off, is it was like, do you know how you would vote if the vote was held today, or if the vote was held tomorrow? Do you know how you'd vote? Yes. Yes or no. Do you know? So then, how would you vote? And then I thought that it was very interesting. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you? How sure are you that your vote will be that decision? On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you're definitely voting that way, and 1 being you're definitely not voting that way, which was quite interesting. And then it's like, regardless of how you think you're going to vote, what do you think is going to win? Which one do you think is going to win? Now, that was good. Then what are the 2 most important issues to you during the campaign? And then they asked the demographics type questions, and then are you registered to vote here? Where are you from originally? But that was really it. So it wasn't actually that long. But I did find it really interesting that they were saying they were obviously very interested in the how are you going to vote? How do you think you're going to vote? What do you think is going to happen? But also, how sure are you? Because you could then have someone saying, "Oh, yeah, I'm voting yes, but I'm not really sure. I'm still I still could be swayed." So that was quite interesting. It was fun. I've never had a pollster call me before. I felt really good. It was Ipsos Mori. So yeah. So there we go.
Gosh. Well, that's very exciting. So you had a potentially influential position on one of these polls. That's exciting.
It was really funny that the guy asking the questions was a Frenchman. So.
Oh, really? Okay, so he wasn't being asked to take sides. Okay, that's clever.
No, obviously. Yeah.
Okay. You've seen just an enormous amount of activity over the last week. I think you would probably have seen that level of activity. You would have seen a high level of activity as the vote got closer. But I have to say that the poll that came out a week ago, I cannot recall a time when a single poll had such a reaction amongst the politicians, amongst the people, and actually amongst the broader international community as well. People who had really not been paying attention to it suddenly wondering, what's going on in Scotland. You've seen a lot of attention, and I think a lot of that attention is because of the poll a week ago that showed that it was really in contention.
Yeah, absolutely, and it almost seemed like that poll was the impetus of actually. I think both sides would say this, but it did seem like that right then was when the national media and national politicians actually started getting involved. And I think that was really really, in one case, disappointing that they hadn't been really involved up till then, but also very interesting to see. You have about 10 days left, and what is everything? Think of the kitchen sink that you could throw there. We're going to go economic, how terrible it is for economic reasons, how terrible it is for cultural reasons, how terrible it is for everything else, and you're throwing in the kind of emotional bit as well. It's kind of been a bit of a soap opera back and forth, but it's really interesting. Certainly, like the fact that Gordon Brown's come up. He's vowed that he might run for the Scottish Parliament because he wants to combat the lies of Alex Salmond. So rah rah rah, and it's been very, very interesting. And you've also seen, I think, coupled with that, a lot of like discussions on social media, a lot more passionate posts by people more so on the no side, at least that I've seen, just because I think you're going to have a lot more outward passion stemming from quite a while back from the yes side, much more so than the no side. I think some people might be very against it, but are only making themselves are only talking about their opinions because they're worried about it. So I think that poll really was quite a big turning point in just the perception of how of the lead up to the referendum. It's made it very exciting to watch.
Yes, it's really, and I say that the polls have kind of been converging, but you really do get a sense that Scotland's future is being forged over this next 10 days or so. Really, regardless of what happens, there's going to be major change. Constitutionally, there'll be major change, even in the event of a no vote, because a lot of more powers are going to be devolved. But you're also seeing a new expression of Scottish identity, and I think that can be a very powerful force for good, but it could also be a very divisive force, as you said. Regardless of which way the vote goes, if you've got approximately 49.5% of people who stake their claim to one side and now feel left out of whatever it is that emerges.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual vote on Thursday, people should know that the polling is set to close at 10 p.m. And the counting will start immediately thereafter. Some of the smaller areas, we expect their results to be announced officially at around 1 a.m. with Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen announcing around 6 or 7 a.m. And so by that stage, the results should be known, unless, of course, the result is really close and you have recounts. So we'll have to pay attention to that. It could be potentially a very, very late night, by which I mean a kind of mid-morning to afternoon time.
Yeah. How do you think? Like we've seen George Osborne cancel his trip to Australia. You're seeing a lot of kind of at least outward-facing worry on the part of some Westminster politicians. Let's say on Thursday it's a barely yes vote. What does Friday look like? What does the day look like?
I think if it is a yes vote, although you saw the panic after this poll was released a week ago, I still don't think fundamentally that politicians in Westminster truly believe that there will be a yes vote. And while there may have been some policy planning in the event of it, I think they're going to wake up, they're going to be a little lost and a little surprised. Alex Salmond is then going to say, hey, we need to try and bring everybody together, and the people who have led the No campaign are going to have to turn around very quickly and say, hey, we're all Scots, we accept this referendum, and we encourage everybody to do so. And the Scottish people who are part of the No campaign are going to then have to face a slightly awkward question of whether to join Alex Salmond and a kind of a negotiating team that will spend the next 18 months partly negotiating a separation from England and then partly writing a constitution for an independent Scotland. Alex Salmond this morning was saying that He would like people from the No campaign, including Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling, to be on his campaign, or to be on his negotiating team, provided they change their views on currency. Seems like be putting the knife in to basically be forcing somebody in order to participate in the formation of a new Scotland to recant their previous views. And so I think that was a silly thing for him to say. So, but anyway, so if they vote yes, I think you're going to see a lot of surprise. You're going to see a lot of shock in the markets, and it'll be a key reaction will be Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling. They have to come out presumably and say, we are all one Scotland, and regardless of the debate, Scotland made a decision, and we're now going to be working as hard as we can to ensure that Scotland is as successful as it can be, even though we know and appreciate the challenges against it.
Right. Okay, so
that's going to happen with vote yes.
Conversely, what happens Friday morning when it is just barely a no vote?
Alex Salmond needs to convince his supporters of two things. He needs to, on the one hand, stick to his pledge that he made that the result, if it's a no, is binding for a generation, and he said that a generation was 18 years. Because Scots, I think, and in fact British people more generally, don't want to just have a referendum every 5 years until the result goes one way or the other. So he needs to convince people that the game is over for 18 years, but that the people who support independence, they need to take a long view. And he needs to persuade people of that, because if people think now independent Scotland is never going to happen, then they're going to feel really disenfranchised from the new Scotland that will emerge with extended powers at Holyrood and so forth. So they need to be involved, especially because even if they lose, we're still talking about 49% of the population who need to be enfranchised and who have made a really bold political statement. It's really important that they're still involved in the process. So he needs to, on the one hand, say, hey, we're not going to have a vote for 18 years, but on the other hand, you still need to be part of the process, and for them, that'll be playing the long game. It's really important that there isn't another referendum for at least 18 or 20 years, maybe 30 years, because just the amount of antagonism between the Scottish government and Westminster, the effect on the markets and so forth, is just it's untenable that we could have that perpetuating for a decade or more. Really, it would have a tremendous stunting effect on Scotland's growth and of Scotland's development as a nation.
Now, what happens though for in the event of a no vote, you have all these people that, as you say, if it was something like 49%, a lot of these people, both sides have said the registrations are up through the roof. They're hoping for an 80% plus turnout. You're having a lot of these people voting for the first time. In some cases, as Alex Salmond would say, since the poll tax, or first time ever. They're coming back into the system. They're wanting to exercise their right. They're wanting to show that they have a voice, and they're seemingly knocked down. In what way can Salmond do that? I understand what you're saying about trying to make it so that it's clear that there's not going to be another vote for 18 years or whatever it is. But in what ways can you do that without one completely completely making those people feel like the system doesn't care about them, but two, not falling into the trap of getting more intense rhetoric? Yes. What are some specific things? Do you think that would Salmond have to try and mend this and then go and say, you know what, we have to there needs to be a new person? Do you think that the Devo Max option should then take hold, and then he should try and pivot all of the yes supporters into negotiating or pushing for the strongest Devo Max option that they could get. How does that what does that look like in a post-independence vote no Scotland in the next few months? Because it seems like that could be a real depending on, he has a lot of power in this sense of completely turning people off politics or somehow getting them involved in, as you say, the long game. What does that look like? Has it been done before?
Yeah, I can't think of a parallel, at least not in British politics. You're right. There's a risk and there's an opportunity. The opportunity is you have a generation who are newly interested and feel deeply enfranchised. They had an opportunity to make an enormous decision. We've had an 80%, 85% turnout projected. So you've got an enormous opportunity for major change by having huge voter involvement and engagement with politics. But you're right, the risk is very strong that 49% of people feel alienated. Alex Salmond has a significant amount of power in this, but the other people who need to project an important message are the no's if they win. They need to make sure, they need to reach out, they need to say, hey, we are all one Scotland, and they need to really show that the Scottish Parliament is an important place for making decisions that affect the future of Scotland apart from Westminster. There will be a transfer of, there's actually scheduled to be a transfer of powers coming in 2015 based on legislation passed a couple of years ago. I think at the time David Cameron thought that would placate a lot of yes voters, but in fact it was now it seems like a pretty small gesture. Gordon Brown has already said he's scheduled a debate in the House of Commons about transferring even more powers. As you said, that's called Devo Max. And so you are going to see that. But more than just transferring powers to the Scottish Parliament, I think it's important for the Scottish Parliament to be seen as a place that politicians want to go if they want to make a difference. At the moment, Labour is still dominant. The independence question to one side, Labour still dominates Scottish politics, and even though they and one of the reasons I think they lost in the Scottish Parliament was because they just didn't put forward very interesting or dynamic politicians. They didn't put forward interesting leaders, and they definitely did not put forward interesting policies that were distinct from Westminster. And I think Gordon Brown needs to follow through on his pledge to run for the Scottish Parliament. Obviously, he had a pretty troubled time as Prime Minister, but he's unarguably one of the big beasts of British politics, and so the fact that he runs in the Scottish Parliament shows that he thinks the decisions that are made there are important. And so it's really necessary, I think, for Labour to show that they are putting forward their A team for their top team for the Scottish Parliament, rather than just the B team dross that couldn't get elected to Westminster, but that have been around long enough to feel they should get something, so they get the Scottish Parliament. I think it's really important for Labour and the other parties to really have a distinctly separate Scottish identity, and not for Scottish Labour to think, hey, we can do a policy, even if it will be embarrassing to the Westminster Labour Party, because we think it's best for Scotland, we're going to pursue that. So I think I think more powers for the Scottish Parliament need to happen, and they will. And I think more, not just more powers, but more importance needs to be given to the Scottish Parliament by politicians, in all the parties. And then they need to try to make sure that there's an extensive reaching out campaign, and that means foot on the ground, knocking on doors, talking to people, asking them to vote. If they've already been interested in these issues, even if they lost, I think they can be persuaded to continue having a say in a new Scotland. But you're right, there's a large risk there, and it's by no means a shoo-in.
And so then conversely, going back, what happens on a wider picture, the day after a Scottish yes vote, in terms of British business. You know, you were saying the markets wouldn't be able to handle, excuse me, another, this hanging over. What happens what happens if the vote is a yes, barely, what have you? You heard a lot of business people come out this week. Is it because David Cameron just told them all to talk? You know, what do you think happens in the weeks ahead?
Yeah. If there's a yes vote, there will be market turmoil. But I don't think. I mean, the FTSE goes up and down based on the most flimsy things. Trying to say that the Scottish people are having their vote, but the markets will be unsure about the outcome, so people should vote no, is a pretty flimsy argument that I've seen going around. But there will be a bit of market turmoil, and it would take a little while for that to settle out. People say that markets can pretty much adapt to good news and bad news. What they don't like is the uncertainty. And so what you'll see is, what you've seen over the last week is uncertainty, and actually with the yes votes, despite that being a decision made, it's going to be difficult to predict how that pans out, and so you've got more uncertainty, and so you'll see more turmoil. The key question will be if the banks follow through on their pledge, on their decision to move south, and how quickly they do that. So you're going to see that. So you'll get a slight litmus test of how real this is, how real all these kind of threats that have been labeled as scaremongering, how real they actually were. Alex Salmond is going to move quickly to forming a committee because he wants to have an Independence Day in March 2016, which only gives 18 months to negotiate independence, during which time Westminster have to have their own elections. So it's going to be difficult to try and have a serious debate in that context. He's going to try and move to bring all of Scotland together. It's going to be very interesting because the No campaign is effectively going to be split up between Scottish people on the No campaign and not Scottish people on the No campaign, like David Cameron and so forth, who suddenly they'll be on opposite sides. And then we'll see what happens with the currency. That's going to be the first thing they're going to try and work out. The yeses have been putting forward this idea that the issue on currency was really just a threat or bluster, and that when it actually comes down to it, Westminster will capitulate on this issue. I find that pretty hard to believe. I think that in the event of a yes vote, Westminster is going to become less likely and open to negotiation with what is going to be a new and independent country, not more so. And so the arguments that they put forward on the currency union are fairly strong, and they're going to lose a lot of cachet with their own voters in England if they suddenly backpedal on this. And English voters would rightly say, well, hang on a minute, all those things you said about us having to bail out Scottish banks in the event of a collapse which wouldn't be reciprocated, that's still all true, right? So why are we signing this thing? That's going to be, I think that's probably that's definitely more difficult than the nationalists have been suggesting. I think the negotiations are going to be very tortured, and I think Salmond is going to try to get them started as soon as possible.
Right. What does it mean for the makeup of British politics in the immediate aftermath? I know you've been hearing some MPs calling for, in the event of a yes vote, a restriction placed on the Scottish MPs so that they can not vote for certain things. Some have said that then the new elections should not include Scotland. The elections this next year, in the event of a yes vote. Do you think those are idle threats? Do you think that there's any case to be made, or like that there's a case that will be made to actually follow through on those threats? And what would it mean if that's the case? Because as you say, if Scotland votes independent, goes independent, British politicians won't care what the Scottish voter has to say.
Yeah.
They're going to be worried about what they, about their own voters, and so it could turn in pretty nasty.
Yeah.
So what would happen in that respect?
Well, I mean, the question you raised there is called the West Lothian question, about whether a Scottish MP should be allowed to vote in Westminster, particularly on issues that really don't affect Scotland because of a Scottish Parliament. The reason the West Lothian question has kind of been put to rest over the last few years, nobody's really talked about it, is because it actually hasn't made that much of a difference. The government of the day has still gotten its way with or without the Scottish MPs. I think you will see that question coming up again. The amount of anger or upset that could be in Westminster in the event of a yes vote, in part because people just haven't anticipated it, truly anticipated this happening. I think you could see quite a high level of anger and upset in Westminster, and then a feeling of, if Scotland's voted to be independent, that's fine, but they shouldn't be influencing our policies. And so you could see moves to implement some kind of a solution to the West Lothian question of the type you suggest. Constitutionally, it's difficult to see how they could do that, but I think there's a real possibility that the political will to find a way through it could be there, just because of the emotion that comes out of this, and perhaps even a feeling of betrayal by some Westminster MPs. So I think you could see immediate effects down in Westminster.
Yeah. So would Cameron go? Would Cameron have to go?
Well, so that is a question that people have been pondering. One of the reasons that people don't want to answer that question is because the No campaign are worried that if David Cameron says, "Hey, I'll go if you all vote yes," then people come out and vote yes, David Cameron. The extent to which that's true, I think, is overstated. But I find it pretty inconceivable that David Cameron would be able to survive in his job. We would be talking about a man who saw the dissolution of the United Kingdom on his watch, and you would definitely be able to say that he just did not put in the time and energy, the effort to try and save the Union until it was already too late. And I think actually the same accusation would be made with good cause against Ed Miliband and a whole heap of other top politicians in Westminster. I think you would see enormous change at the top. Labour particularly, because a lot of their MPs,
particularly Labour.
Yeah, particularly Labour, because a lot of their MPs in the cabinet or shadow cabinet level represent Scottish constituencies. So you'll see literally change there. But I think just more generally, you're going to see the parties, the backbenchers, really rise up against those leaders for having allowed such a catastrophe to happen.
And it just seems as though there's this potential that at least a lot of people in the yes are saying, well, of course the Westminster government is arguing a certain way, is arguing a certain way, and of course after a yes victory, it would change, the mood would change because it would be silly for them not to. You haven't really heard very much about the flip of the coin of, well, why? Why would they care?
Why would they
worry about it? Yeah. So the question to you then is, on one side you have a very angry, let's say it's a post yes, or a post vote with the yes. You have probably a very angry electorate in the rest of the UK. They're very upset. They're very upset that about the economic consequences for the rest of the UK that obviously have not been talked about by the Yes campaign or the No campaign. How does England suffer? How does Wales suffer? How does Northern Ireland suffer from the loss of Scotland? Transaction costs do go both ways, and they keep arguing about how Scotland would be worse off, but the rest of the UK would also suffer as well. So you have a lot of people that would argue that they've been kept in the dark about that. But then you also have the yes side of the equation saying it makes sense to have a currency union in order to stave off some of these problems. We are still going to be the biggest trading partner of the UK. We're not going to have transaction costs, so it's all going to be hunky dory. To what degree are the realities of this is not thinking about Scotland at all, or what degree of the realities of angry voters versus real economic hurt from a lack of a currency union with Scotland? Which one carries out? Is it not that big of an economic deal to the rest of the UK to lose Scotland, or is it a bigger deal to stave off, even if you have to make a very unpopular set of decisions, but to actually keep a currency union, keep some sort of relationship with a newly independent Scotland? Don't know if that makes sense.
That's a great question. I think probably the rest of the UK, to say that their first reaction would be anger, I think would probably be a mistake. But you're definitely right. You're definitely right in saying that the consequences for the rest of the UK have not been talked about, and so you're going to see bewilderment is maybe a bit of a stretch, but you're going to see people asking questions, and so David Cameron, if he's still in his, going to have, his main task is going to be to reassure not just the rest of the world that the rest of the UK is still open for business and that this is not a calamity. He's going to have to reassure his own people. He's going to have to reassure voters in England, Wales, Northern Ireland that they will be able to get through this. And at times the negotiations may get messy, and that yes, there is an economic hit, but that we can go through it. How he's going to manage that, I don't know, and I suspect that he doesn't have a game plan in place because up until a week ago, he didn't seem to think that a yes vote was terribly likely.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. I mean, we've never seen something like this in the modern world, in a way of it kind of being certainly a legitimate possibility of a separation of a nation, such a nation as the UK, with such vested interests in a lot of parts of the world, such a large financial center. I think that the rest of the world, also the US, the rest of the UK, London, a lot of large there's a lot at stake here that a lot of people outside of Scotland had no idea until this week, what it actually meant. I mean, it's making news in the States,
Yeah.
and it was in the culture section before, and now it's nearer to the front and on the financial pages, and so it's going to be incredibly fascinating to see what happens. Are there any things, not surprises, not like October surprises? Are there any quirks or things that you have inklings about what's going to happen now in these final few days that we should be watching out for?
That the number that has, I've been reading the polls fairly closely, and the number that has fluctuated the most isn't the yes vote or the no vote, it's the number of undecideds.
Yeah.
I can't remember which poll it was, but the most recent poll I read reckoned there were 17% undecided, whereas other polls I've read have had it under 10% or so. So there's either a lot of fluctuation going on there, or people are not making up their minds. So what is going to happen to those undecideds is going to be crucial. Up until this point in the campaign, undecideds have been breaking disproportionately to the yes campaign,
right.
But not at a great enough level of disproportion to actually take the yes to victory if it continued. On the other hand, most of the time in a general election, in the last few days or so, you see undecideds voting for the devil they know. But to what extent is that true of a referendum? And maybe it's true for a politician when two guys, and they're both basically pretty awful, but one is at least a known quantity. The other person you don't know, so you end up voting for the incumbent. How true does that mentality? To what extent does that mentality translate into a referendum is difficult to tell. The example of Quebec is certainly suggests that maybe people will go towards the no's, but every referendum is different, so it's going to be difficult to see how that happens. So I will be watching very closely the undecideds and how they're breaking, particularly in the last couple of days or so. What do you think is going to be the event, aside from the actual vote itself, that defines the kind of final few days of campaigning?
Yeah. Well, interesting. Thursday is going to be a late night.
Yes, it is going to be a late night. Yes.
I'm sure that the BBC will have many cranes in operation. I remember that on the eve of the 2010 elections, Westminster elections, the BBC had a new toy. It was this massive crane, camera crane in front of number 10 that would like follow someone as they walked in and then zoom in right in front, to number 10. I'm sure there's going to be things like that. I don't mean to make light of it, but certainly it is a spectacle. But it is certainly very interesting to see all the passions coming up. We've had some interesting comments on our YouTube video so far while we've been talking. Certainly there have been quite a few passionate people out there, but I think that at the end of the day, the best people from both sides that I've talked to, at the end of the day, want Scotland to succeed, and so I react best to people coming on the street, coming up to me or talking to me. Certainly being very passionate on their side, but at the end of the day, if the vote doesn't go their way, they're encouraged, they're optimistic, and they're willing to engage any way they can in order to make Scotland a better place. So I just hope that everybody kind of takes that to heart, and that we can push the angriness of some people down, and understand that passions right now might be running a little high. And they certainly are, in certain parts of the country. But hopefully, people are getting their excitement out. They're getting their anger out through words. That's it. And that no matter what the result is, that, as you say, both sides, the no and the yes campaign, can kind of start to blur together. Because Alex Salmon calls it the Team Scotland afterwards, and I know, as you say, the no campaign, it's basically in the hands of Westminster to deliver on Devo Max. But it certainly will be interesting. So you must be sad that you're missing this.
So we have, I think, a few minutes for our famous quiz. I'm afraid I only have 3 questions this week.
We'll do 3 questions then.
3 questions?
Yeah, we'll do 3 questions. I have all of my questions are somewhat obscure Scottish trivia. So if you don't get all 3 questions right, you're obviously not a patriot, and I'm just going to toss that there.
Whoa, harsh.
Harsh. Okay, you go first.
Okay. Well, so mine is actually this was actually a question I read over the summer, or from a news article I read over the summer in American politics. There was a candidate in Arizona's 7th district called Scott Fissler. He lost his attempt to win the district the first time he ran 4 years ago. What was the major change he made to his campaign the second time around, which still didn't get him over the finish line, but was certainly a dramatic change?
Where was this?
This was Arizona's 7th district.
Did he change his name to Human?
Oh, I'm going to give you the point. He changed his name to Cesar Chavez.
That's that guy. Okay, no, don't give me the point. There was another, I think it was in New Hampshire or something. The guy changed his name to Human Being.
Human Being? Oh, no. Yeah. So this guy, the district is more than half Hispanic, and so he thought he would try to take advantage of that by changing his name.
Oh, well.
I'm going to give you the point, man. I think I would not have gotten that. You got the point.
Okay. Okay. So a Scot, William Patterson, was the instigator and co-founder of the Bank of England. He later attempted, unsuccessfully, to establish Scotland's first colony, called New Caledonia. Where?
In Canada?
Nope, in Panama.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh.
Didn't work, but it was going to be in Panama, and it was going to facilitate trade with the Far East. So you
Goodness.
could have had Panama being called New Caledonia, and it could have been a Scottish colony.
Goodness, that's astonishing.
Yep.
Okay, so farmers in China have found what way of dramatically increasing their rice production?
Farmers in China increasing their rice production.
Yeah.
Can you give me? Is it to do with environmental?
No, it has nothing to do with the environment. It would not be. You could not say that it was a traditional farming technique.
But increasing their rice production.
No.
Are they? I don't know. Are they growing it on the roofs of their houses?
Oh, that's not even close. No, they've been playing Buddhist temple music in the fields. Apparently, this has had a dramatic effect, increasing yield. So there you go.
Wow. They like their songs. I wonder what like heavy metal would do to them. Go popping like crazy. All right, let's see. I have a couple here. I want to see. Okay, well, actually, so in 1794, a Scottish engineer, William Murdoch, was the first to introduce this into homes. So something that we all have in our house, or quite a few of us have in our house, a staple of homes, especially in Scotland, was first introduced in 1794, and what was that?
A staple of homes.
William Murdoch. You should know your famous Scottish engineers, Gordon, from the 1790s.
I should know my famous Scottish engineers. Especially in Scotland part is the part that's flummoxing me. I guess I can't think of something that I or my parents have at home, but that my cousins south of the border don't have in their home.
Your cousins south of the border probably might have it as well. Not every house has it. It's just that certainly the introduction of this was a big deal, and I'd imagine that especially in Scotland it was a big deal.
The indoor toilet?
Oh, very close, but that would have been a big deal everywhere.
Yeah.
This was the first. He built the first ever house to be lit by gas. It's quite dark here.
Cool.
And heated by gas. So.
Very clever.
Yes.
Very clever. Okay, so this is my final question. So this was a report released in June by a Washington-based think tank called the Commonwealth Fund. They rated 11 countries' healthcare outcomes and found that the UK came top. It had the best healthcare system, and those 11 countries they looked at 11 different measures of success, and the UK's NHS came top in 8 of those 11 measures. According to the report by The Guardian, there was only one serious black mark against the NHS. What was that? What was the one black mark against the NHS?
Is it more people died?
More people died. That's pretty much it, actually.
Everything's good except more people died.
They said this without any irony. They said the only serious black mark against the NHS was its poor record of keeping people alive,
Yes.
which is like the main job of a national health service. So, maybe it's run with more efficiency. I don't know, but anyway, I think the NHS is outstanding, but this particular report seemed pretty cack-handed. So there you go.
Okay, finally, so this is a very famous publication, and it was first published in Edinburgh between 1768 and 1771, and it has been published even up until now, and it is the oldest surviving type of this publication. What is this?
Sorry, what were the dates you said?
A very famous publication, and it's still being published today, and it started in, between 1768 and 1771, published in Edinburgh first.
Oh,
there have been 15 of these publications so far. 15 like editions.
I feel like, I mean, I don't know. Is it the King James Bible? I think that the dates are actually, it's a little late for the King James Bible.
Yeah.
Actually by about 100 years or so. Wealth of the Nations by Adam Smith?
It is the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. Oh, well, I'm afraid I finished on 0 points and you finished on 2 points. So the crown goes to you. Congratulations.
Right. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, Gordon. It will certainly be a very exciting week.
Yes.
We should try and go over all the polling and stuff next Sunday, but I imagine that there will be a lot of questions either way about what's next, and certainly will be one of the more exciting weeks that I've experienced in politics. So hopefully there'll be stuff worth talking about, but not in a bad way.
Stuff will have happened, so we can talk.
Stuff will have happened. People would have done stuff. Anyway, I hope the week goes well. For anybody still watching, which it seems like quite a few people are, I hope that you find this interesting, exciting, exhilarating, and be safe. And no matter what happens, I hope that that people can just be excited for Scotland. And so, with that, have a good week, Gordon.
Oh, and you too, Gulp.
Alrighty, see you.